All right, let's get started. Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to your own living rooms, kitchen tables, and office spaces, and to our XYZ Ceramics and Digital Fabrication Symposium. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Matt Karras, and I teach here in the ceramics program at Concordia University, and I'm going to be your virtual host for this event. This symposium accompanies this year's Virginia McClure Ceramics Biennale, and it brings ceramics artists Harrow, Eliza Au, Emre Can, Jeanne Quinn, and myself, Matt Karras, together for discussion. There will be some awkwardness, hopefully not too much, as I play the role of host and participant at the same time, so I'm sorry about that. The symposium includes artist talks. We're going to be doing some of those today. Demonstrations, those are going to be starting this coming Monday at 2 p.m. with Jeanne Quinn, and a roundtable discussion on October 22nd. I'm going to list the upcoming demonstrations at the very end of this introductory event, and you can always find them online at xyzsymposium.com. If you are a Concordia student, the details and Zoom links will be made available through the Ceramics Moodle Hub. As the virtual hosts of this event, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationship with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. If you have questions during today's talks, please pose them in the chat and we can do our best to parse through there and answer questions asynchronously through the chat window. It could be that we don't manage to answer all questions today. If that's the case, the best time to pose questions will be at the artists' individual demonstrations or at the roundtable discussion on October 22nd. For now, I'd ask that you all keep yourselves muted to avoid any background noise. And just so you know, we are recording this event. There are many people to thank for this. I'd like to start by thanking the show's curator, Amélie Proulx. Amélie teaches with us here at Concordia and also at the Maison des métiers d'art in Quebec. I'd also like to thank the Westmount Visual Arts Center and their staff. Thank you, Natasha Reed, Barbara Wisniewski, and Renée Duval. The Centre Materia, merci Guy Langelvin. And the Maison des métiers d'art, merci Thierry Plante-Dubé. I'd also like to thank the Office of Research and Graduate Studies at Concordia University, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Conseil des Arts et des Lettres du Québec, and the Conseil des Arts de Montréal. I'd certainly like to thank all of our participating artists. Thank you, Del, Eliza, Emre, and Jeanne for sharing your time and ideas with us. And finally, I'd like to thank both my colleagues in ceramics, Linda and Marie-Pierre, for their tireless work running the ceramics program at Concordia. Amélie and I will briefly introduce the artists before they speak, but at this time, I'd like to introduce Amélie Proulx to give a few brief remarks about the show. Amélie is a ceramic artist from Quebec City, and as I mentioned, Amélie teaches with us here at Concordia and also in Quebec City at Maison des métiers d'art. Amélie, we're lucky to have you and lucky that you've put this group together for us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome everybody to the first virtual event part of the XYZ Symposium. In 2019, I was invited by Natasha, the director of the Visual Arts Center in Montreal, to be the curator of the 4th Virginia McClure Ceramic Biennale. For this 4th edition, I decided to present the work of ceramic artists who work with new technologies in different and innovative ways. Over the past few decades, the art world has seen a plethora of digital technologies that have allowed artists to create with new tools and new art forms. The ceramics community has also witnessed the creation of tools and fabrication methods that continually push the boundaries of what is possible. Digital processes now make it possible to create with 3D scanners, modeling software, and various machines that generate volumes that were previously designed by computer. With the development of these methods, a new visual language has also been created that is already distinguished by a series of iconic and formal signs of its own. So the fourth edition of the Biennale brings together 5 artists who use various digital technologies, often in subversive ways, to create surprising bodies of work that challenge our perception of digital technologies and contemporary ceramics. Eliza Au, Emre Can, Harrow, Matt Carras, and Jeanne Quinn were selected for their common interest in appropriating digital tools and thwarting their primary utility to breathe new life into their material of predilection. Their work examined the relationship between the theoretical object and the tangible object, in addition to questioning the physical and chemical characteristics of the ceramic material itself. Each artist has developed a personal parametric design process, a lexicon of their own, where tradition and innovation, the known and the unknown meet. I am honored that these 5 artists have accepted my invitation to be part of this 4th edition of the Biennale. And without further waiting, I would like to introduce you to the first artist who will present today as part of the XYZ Symposium. On behalf of the ceramic program, I am very pleased to welcome Harrow. Harrow lives and works in Fort Collins, Colorado. Is an associate professor at Colorado State University. His art practice spans genre of sculptures and design and integrates traditional manual and skill-based forming processes with digital fabrication technology. Has been invited to lecture widely on his own work and on the intersection of digital fabrication and craft in contemporary art and education. Recent lectures include Syracuse University, the Everson Museum of Art, the Auerbach Endowed Lecture Series at Hartford Art School, and the Current Perspective Lecture Series at Kansas City Art Institute. Dell's work has been exhibited at the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Denver Art Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, just to name a few. Harrow, hello, and thank you for joining us.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Thank you so much for that introduction, Amélie, and thank you to you and Matt and everyone else for all your work organizing this amazing exhibition. I wish we could be there in person, but this will have to do. So let me see, I'll just share my screen here. Can everyone see that first image all right?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about my work, but really also about some kind of larger ideas, which I think relate to this exhibition, this really exciting exhibition. And I thought I'd just start actually with just a few images of my work, just to give you kind of a sense visually of what I do. Oops, let me see. The slides aren't advancing. Let me just stop sharing and start again. Do this one more time. Let's try again. Share. There we go. Great. So I thought I'd start by just showing some images of my work. Just really to kind of give you a sense visually of some of the things that I do, some of the things I make, the way that I work. And I'm not going to talk about these images specifically, but while they're playing, I thought maybe I could just kind of begin by speaking about a few larger thoughts. And one of the things I wanted to say is I'm actually really interested in thinking about and approaching the slide talk as a kind of a form, and the short slide talk, like this one in particular. And I was interested today in kind of playing with this form a little bit. So I wanted to try something with this talk, which because of its length might feel a little bit more like poetry than prose. I'm not saying that it'll be a good poem, but I'm thinking about it in that way. So in other words, not everything might sort of make sense or kind of fit together perfectly, but I wanted to approach it a little bit more like the way I approach my sculpture, as a kind of a formal idea. And maybe like a poem, you know, it's kind of about putting some things in relation to each other, ideas, images, words, in a way that might offer us something, maybe a kind of form or technology to think with, to think about my work, but also to think about contemporary ceramics, about technology, you know, about history and about time. And the other idea that I'd like to bring up now and come back to a little bit later, as we're looking at these images, is about this idea of the image itself and the problem of images. So we're looking at images of objects, things that are tactile, physical, and material. You know, these are things that we can walk around and pick up. And I don't think of this problem of the image as only a limitation. I'm actually very interested in this kind of dialectic in the work between these two different form ideas, you know, the way that physical objects become a formal composition on a flat screen, but they also hold this other formal structure, this other reality as physical and material things. So I live in, as Amélie said, I live in Fort Collins, Colorado. I live there with my wife, the potter Sana Mamami, and our son, William. And Sana and I both have studios here. And we also both teach at Colorado State University. Our art department at CSU is divided into areas of concentration. And I teach in 3 of these. I teach in sculpture and digital fabrication and in pottery. And a lot of people are kind of surprised that we call this area pottery. Most contemporary programs are now called ceramics. We inherited this name from our predecessor, Richard DeVore. And, you know, in spite of a lot of questions about this and maybe some challenges over the years, we've chosen not to change it. And we've chosen to do that for a few reasons that I think are interesting, and they relate to the way that I think about my work. Years ago, I was having a conversation with a materials scientist, a ceramic engineer, and I just asked him, what in your definition is ceramics? And he said that, well, a ceramic in my mind is anything that is not an organic or a metal. And I was like, wow, that's a huge category of things that doesn't seem to capture very much specifically about what it is that I feel like I do, what I think my discipline is about. And instead, if we think about this word pottery, you know, today, maybe it's a kind of limited word, which is limited to like tableware, functional pots. But if we go back to an older definition of pottery, a pottery was just describing anything that was made in a kind of a factory, anything that was made in a pottery. So anything that was made out of clay with a certain set of technologies for forming that material. So it could have included things like bricks or architectural components or statues. And that, I feel, really resonated for me as a way that I think about, you know, my discipline, the way that I think about the work that I make. It's about this combination of material and technology. So clay and ways of forming clay. So I use a wide range of different technologies in my work. A lot of the work is made using some kind of a CAD or computer-aided design software. This is a model for a form in the 3D computer-aided design software Rhino or Rhinoceros. And this is one of the main software applications I use. And I'm often using this software in combination with, I'll stop that horrible noise. I'm often using that software in some combination with, or maybe I can go back to it for a second. I'm sorry about the noise. I didn't realize this video had sound. Oh, I guess I can just stop it there. So I'm often using Rhino in some combination with some kind of computer-controlled machining. So here I'm carving a block of foam. I often carve plaster with this machine. And then recently I'm doing more and more work with also 3D printing, both plastic and clay. But when I think about technology in relation to ceramics, I also think about processes like this traditional coiling technique as a kind of technology. And so when I think about technology, I'm really thinking about, again, this very expanded definition of that idea as a technology as anything that we're using to kind of structure or organize or parse material, but also structuring and organizing our bodies or our movements. The word technology etymologically, comes from this ancient Greek word techne, which just means in some sense craft or skill. So when I think about technology, maybe the aspect that I'm most interested in is technologies as being some way in which we, something we use to make the world thinkable. And in that sense, I think that we can think about time and history also as technologies. And recently, and kind of for this talk, I've been playing around with using Rhino, the same CAD software that I use for making physical forms, to try to visualize something about this really long, kind of unfathomably long history of ceramic technology. And so I made this kind of timeline of ceramic history in Rhino. And one of the things Rhino is really good at is holding really precise relationships of scale. So if I can make a line that's 1 inch long, and here in this model, 1 inch represents 1 year. And if we go back 1 year in the United States, we were in the midst of this really contentious presidential election. And I can take that 1 year and multiply it by 20. And 20 years ago, we recently recognized the 20-year anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. And many of us might draw direct lines between this event and the conditions of that 2020 election, how it affected our sense of security, our sense of borders, our sense of nations and national identities. I've also recently been thinking about just the material fact of that event, that when an airplane ran into the Pentagon, this was also an aluminum object colliding with a ceramic object. And we only have to go back a little ways, only 5 times that 10-year history, to get back to the very first airplanes and the very first manned flight. And considering how recent that is, and what a relatively short period of time we've had these technologies that seem so fundamental to our modern world, maybe this starts to give us some sense of the scale of ceramic history. So in other words, if we multiply that 100 years by 20, that 100 years by 20, it only takes us back to 1 AD. So this is the time of the Roman Empire, the Mayan Empire, and humans all over the planet were still making ceramics, like this pot from present-day China. And we have to take that time span now of 2,000 years and multiply it again by 10 to get back to the earliest known ceramic artifacts, like this figure, which was found at the archaeological site of Dolní Věstonice in the present-day Czech Republic. So I think as potters, we can think of this time and this history as one of the technologies that we're working with. And forms, these objects, are also technologies. You know, they're not languages, but they're ways of making some aspect of the world thinkable. One of the objects in this sense is a kind of thinking technology that I've been thinking about a lot, is this pot from what we now call the Mimbres culture in southern New Mexico. And, you know, I want to be really careful in approaching and talking about an object like this, you know, that comes from a long time ago, that comes from a culture really different than my own. This was made about 1,000 years ago. This is a culture where we don't have access to other written histories, and there isn't really a traceable cultural lineage to an extant indigenous culture. As I'm approaching this object, you know, I'm thinking about this quote by Emily Dickinson, apprehensions are God's introductions to be hallowed accordingly. So I'm thinking about this idea of apprehension, both as something tactile, about grasping, but also about trepidation. So, you know, what are the things I can say about this object? Well, I can say we found in these forms residue from food, so they were used for eating out of, and they're also found in burial sites. They're placed over the bodies of the deceased. And these holes in the middle, which are referred to as kill holes, were made by piercing a metal spike through the bowl and through the skull of the deceased person. So what can I say about this object? You know, it's an object that was made by a being with hands, a being with a mind, and it's a bowl with a hole in it. And to me, this bowl is a thinking object, in some sense, about this kind of fundamental paradox of our experience, you know, that we experience the world as objects, and these objects seem to have a permanence, you know, of containers or of stones. We experience our bodies as a kind of container, as a surface with a boundary that holds the self. And at the same time, we understand equally that our bodies are only a fleeting and continually changing configuration of atoms, and that even the objects which appear most stable and permanent, when we come to the horizons of our scientific understanding, you know, in physics and quantum mechanics, they're not made up of what we would think of as matter, but instead of fleeting interactions, of moments, of changes in states, or in the words of the physicist Carlo Rovelli, we understand that the world is made not of stones, but of kisses, or things like kisses. And so vessels or ceramic containers seem to be one of our longest forms or technologies, not for understanding, but for trying to think these apparently paradoxical thoughts of the object or the container. These are a series of forms or containers with holes in them. I think these could be called pots or objects or sculptures that I've made. And I think of these objects as trying to think in this way. So I won't explain or really talk about each of them, but I'll just say that each was named for an artist or a sociologist or a designer or a mathematician whose work also dealt with this problem of the container. And this one is called Mapplethorpe, Vignelli, Simmel, and Klein. And so this brings me to the work in this exhibition, which I'm just going to talk about really briefly for a number of reasons. This work really started, I think, like many of the pieces I make, as a kind of an intuition, or what I might also call a kind of a form thought. So I'm not sure yet that I really have a way of verbally articulating what this work is fully about. I think that often takes me a long time. What I can say is that in some sense, you know, this work was interested in a kind of paring down of elements. And I'm thinking about, you know, forms, ceramic forms in this basic kind of cylindrical form. So a vase on the left by the potter Gertrude Bascard, and on the right, a Bizin water jar. And then I'm thinking about, what new technologies might bring to these really primary ceramic forms. So the way that this form was made was I began with the cylindrical shape and then used CAD software and physics simulation to make this form collapse or begin to collapse, and then froze it in this kind of collapsing moment. I was also thinking in this form about ideas of the classical form and classicism. The work that I make often involves some kind of a dialectic between two things in relation to each other. So here, this collapsing cylinder is paired actually with fragments taken from classical statues or statuary. And these are digital models that are just freely available online. This model was taken from a 3D scan of an object from the Danish Museum. And I'm taking fragments of these classical statues and adding them to these collapsing cylindrical forms. And so finally, I might say that coming back to this idea of the image, another kind of dialectic that I'm interested in these objects is, again, between the vignette or the image, the visual composition framed by just one point of view, and the object, which is only fully apprehended through that movement or tactile encounter. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Del. Next, on behalf of the ceramics program, I'm very pleased to welcome Eliza Au. Eliza Au is an artist originally from Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. Eliza has taught in Canada, the United States, and internationally at various institutions, including Emily Carr, the Alberta College of Art and Design, Monmouth College, the University of Iowa, and the Alfred Kaffa, which is the Central Academy of Fine Arts program in Beijing. Eliza is currently an assistant professor of ceramics at the University of North Texas. And Eliza has exhibited extensively, both nationally and internationally. Eliza, hello, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's been really great to be included in the show. And thank you to Amélie and you and also Concordia for hosting this. So yeah, I'll just get started. My talk is called Slicing and Slotting Ornamental Lattices. Next slide, please. So I think about my practice of kind of three different elements that are coming together. One is architecture, pattern, and then also technology. So in architecture, I look at historical architecture and also contemporary architecture, particularly architecture that is related to sacred spaces. I don't necessarily draw from one culture in particular, but there are certain elements that are kind of universal among sacred spaces that I draw from. Pattern, I'll talk about that a little more, but I'm really interested how pattern exists in sacred spaces and how it works together to create that experience that you have. And also technology. So obviously ways of making pattern and, thinking about pattern and repeating it. And just ways of that in conjunction in terms of accuracy, sort of speed of kind of visualizing all those things that they're connected to. So next slide, please. So these are some of the influence that I look at. Sort of sacred spaces, particularly like Isnik tiles, the kind of repeating pattern, these kind of blue and kind of white and like accents of red. I'm also really interested in these kind of stalactite formations that, you can go under these domes and see these very like beautiful kind of stalactite like forms as well. So pattern and architecture basically used to create this experience. So next slide. Ely Cathedral. So I'm really interested how cathedrals, like, that idea of light and also height and symmetry also give you the feeling of, being in a sacred space. So next slide. More kind of examples of what I'm influenced by, Karnas, looking up into these sort of domes or like spaces that are filled with a lot of kind of visual pattern as well. So I'm really interested in how spaces can kind of transport you into this mental state of kind of solitude and contemplation, and just kind of remove you from basically the whole world that you live in, and also all that like very chaotic kind of mental space that we all experience. So next slide, please. So this is some of my really early work coming out of undergrad. And I was really interested in how two-dimensional pattern integrates with three-dimensional space. So for this piece, actually, it was a series of these bowls that were, formed, and then also, the bowl in the center is lower, and then it goes slowly up and up to create kind of a undulation for the whole thing. So, I was really interested in how those two elements really came together. So, you could look like directly into these objects that were in the wall. I also had a floor piece that you could look down into to create those experiences. So next slide. So I'm thinking about, historical architecture and historical pattern, and how that is related to the wireframe structure in CAD. So, you can see on the left, these wireframe structures are, they're decorative, but they're also, it holds this whole screen together as well. But, the wireframe structure that you use to draw in CAD, I also work in Rhino CAD as well. So that's kind of the basis of that structure. And it's a beautiful thing in itself. So I'm really interested how like kind of pattern and then also structure itself is ornamental. Next slide, please. So I had looked at something called the Bravais Lattices. So these were actually different points that mark positions where a pattern motif could be. So these 5 lattices, every pattern can be kind of broken down into some sort of system. So it's really interesting for me to think about, these grids or these structures that basically underlie pattern in general. So, how can we make like all sorts of different combinations with this one kind of structure or system that we can, use. So next slide, please. So anyways, this is just an example of, taking a basic oval form and then, positioning them according to the dots. So you can see that, you can have one pattern motif, and you can have like a lot of different patterns depending how you arrange them. Next slide, please. So, more ideas of, how to arrange patterns on a two-dimensional space. So translation, basically copying it, rotation, obviously, or reflecting a pattern motif. So these things in combination with the Bravais grid, you can get so many different sorts of patterns, as you can see on the left as well. So I believe the Bravais grid, you can have it in a two-dimensional space, but that also comes from crystallography, I believe. So it also exists more complex in a three-dimensional space. Great, thanks. Next slide. So this is a piece that I had done quite a while ago. So I use when I started Rhino, I used it more as a sketchbook. So I was mostly doing line drawings. And then I would actually print out those drawings, and I would cast a piece of plaster and just use it to measure and kind of shape these forms. And then I'd make a mold of them, and then I'd make them into wax, and then I'd repeat them and cast it again to get like symmetrical objects. So I wasn't 3D printing anything at the time. It was like, it was more for visualization. So later on, actually, it's more like, you know, it allows me to plan things and also make changes at the beginning of the process. So, you know, I know like this complex structure, what it's going to be, what it's going to look like. And so I can think about, you know, how does one element that I'm working on, like, should I change it because I want the end result to be different? So, you know, none of this was, you know, made or 3D print. I'm sorry, it wasn't like printed on a machine or something like that. It wasn't outputted to anything. It was just simply like a visualization of what I was going to make. The next slide, please. So this is the product of, you know, the rendering that you saw just beforehand. So it was a set of 27 modules. So it's a grid of 3 by 3 by 3 that were stacked up. So it's almost like 9 totem poles that are standing next to each other, but all together they look like kind of one piece. So I was really interested, you know, how this kind of XYZ axis kind of work together to create these different sort of planes in space. And then also, you know, this work is obviously really influenced by wrought iron kind of gates or designs. But again, like, you know, it's glazed in a very organic way. Next slide, please. Some more work, you know, ideas of kind of stacking to create kind of volume and form, and then also pushing the clay to become like really thin and kind of sinuous. So just like a little bit about my process is that I usually fire high and then I glaze low. So it's like a high bisque. And then so in the high bisque, it's supported somehow by like a setter or a shape. And then when it's glazed, you know, it doesn't deform because it's already been, you know, set at that high temperature. So this was a piece that was really influenced by those mukarnas and those kind of scalloped architectural features. Next slide, please. So yeah, I think Matt mentioned that I was in China teaching with the Central Academy of Fine Arts, and Alfred did set up a program there with the school. It's not, it's an actual department in the art school there. It isn't like necessarily, how do you say, like just an exchange program, though they do have exchange programs with Alfred. So it's been going on for 10 years, and they usually have someone from the West that comes and teaches there. So yeah, so that was a humongous learning experience for me. My parents are originally from Hong Kong, so they actually moved to Canada in the late 60s. They moved to Vancouver for most of my life.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Mommy. Mommy. Oh yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so you know, I had the chance to go to Jingdezhen, which was really great. And I got to see kind of how they worked with porcelain there, you know, and working with the clay really firsthand. So I got to see a lot of things that related to my culture, but also, you know, obviously experiencing education in a completely different country as well. So next slide. Just more of my work that I was doing there. So in Jingdezhen or in China, I did start doing a process called slice forms. So that's actually different tiles that could, you know, that you can design and can be slotted together. So first they were all high fired kind of flat and then slotted together to create a form. So, you know, again, you know, pattern design and then 2D to 3D, which has been basically a common element in my work. So next slide. Some of the work that I produced in China. So I have I do a lot of work that is based on the modules that, building modules. So the brick, the tile, and the pillar. So the whole entire shape is really quite kind of boxy, but then the pattern itself can be very much more fluid or kind of sinuous as well. So next slide. More work as well. So, you know, almost the sort of bowl-like form tiles and that are different kind of shapes, and then there's sides that basically hold it together and are slotted together as well. Next slide. More examples. So kind of like an oval sort of ball shape here. I also use the kind of motif of the curved line or the arabesque in my work. Next slide. I think this is one of the works in the show. So, more currently, actually, I am using these pattern slabs to actually build volumetric forms. So it is like more of like an object into itself. And then in terms of the slotting, these are actually 4 pillars that have a little bit of like a triangular kind of, I don't know, peak or something like that. So the pillars actually slot into the top and then the bottom. So that was actually really technically challenging, just in terms of, how I was going to put these kind of very, obviously very thin, like lattice-like objects together, and just, dealing with a lot of issues of kind of joining things together, because you have to have a little bit of play in the joint. I had been looking at a bit of Japanese joinery at this point. I might go back to that kind of idea a little bit later on, but yeah, so it's much more of a volumetric form. It just holds kind of shadow and shape a lot differently. And I was really interested in how, like, kind of looking down into it, how the light kind of moved through it, was really interesting. And it just really, like, I thought about my experiences when I'm out in the landscape and how architecture and kind of shadow really create that experience. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, so I'm gonna just wrap up with the couple things that I'm working on right now. I'm working on 2 kind of larger projects, but this is one of them. So I'm actually making like a series of 5 kind of frames made of, I say 8 different kind of bricks together. So they're joined like kind of vertically and also horizontally as well. But anyways, then I'm actually combining kind of slip casting and also hand building. The lattices are actually hand built, or more of a hand building kind of technique. So it's just really interesting how you have a lattice form, and then the object itself has some sort of volume, and then you can actually look through the object as well to see those layers. Next slide. And I just put in these slides because this is where I teach. I teach at the University of North Texas, and I've been here for 2 years. We have a great undergrad and also graduate program there as well. So part of our mission is to kind of promote digital technology across all media. So it's like ceramics, textiles, we have jewelry, and also, some design programs as well. So it's been really great here, just in terms of my own work, developing my own work, and also having conversations with the faculty that I work with. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so this is my website and also my email and Instagram if you do want to follow me. So thank you.
Thank you, Eliza. Sorry about that intrusion. I'm going to try to splice that out of the recording.
That was odd, yes.
Yeah, that was odd. Next we've got Emre, but I'm going to invite Amélie to introduce Emre Can.
Yes, thank you, Eliza, for the great talk. On behalf of the ceramics program, I'm very pleased to welcome Emre Can. Emre lives and works in Bilecik, Turkey, where he is a professor at the Bilecik, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Emre, University Faculty of Fine Arts Ceramic Department. Emre creates unbelievably complex 3D printed ceramics forms that bridge the world of pottery, sculpture, and technology. Emre has been featured in the Ceramic Monthly magazine. He has presented at the International Ceramic Symposium and Art Education Exchange Program in China, and exhibited internationally at the International Ceramic Biennale in Korea, the National Museum of Slovenia, and the International Manu Ceramic Biennale, just to name a few. Emre Can, hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me at such a nice Biennale, and I'm really excited to be here, and I'm so happy to be part of such a nice and amazing artist, Harrow, Eliza, Matkaras, and Jeanne Quinn. I'm really happy to be here. And I would like to start. Amelia say something about me, but I would like to introduce myself firstly, and I would like to share my history, ceramic history. Firstly, I would like to say, and firstly, I share presentation. Yeah, you can see.
Yeah, I can see it on your end.
Is it? Okay. Firstly, I would like to introduce I would like to start by introduce myself. I'm Emre Can from Turkey. I live in Bilecik and Bozüyük, and I'm working at Bilecik Şehir University and Fine Arts Faculty Ceramic Department. I started to make ceramic with in high school. I graduated from the ceramic high school, so I'm really it gave me a really big experience because I started to make ceramic when I was 15 years old, and it was a really big experience for me about the ceramics. And after graduated from the high school, I went to Fine Arts Faculty of Concordia University, and after that, I graduated from the master degree from same university, and after that, I graduated from the PhD from Anadolu University. And so when I was studying in PhD lesson, I started to make some things with 3D printer because we have to make a thesis about for the PhD degree. So when I was preparing or I had to decide some subject or so I couldn't remember. My English is not very fast, so and when I was researching something on the internet, I saw this piece. So it was really excited me because when I saw this piece, I was really excited because it is material ceramics and with making a 3D printer, and I was really interested three-dimensional program when I was researching something about 3D printer or something, and so I decided to make some three-dimensional printer, and after that when I started to make a research, there was no people in Turkey, and so I want to learn something about 3D printer on clay, and I choose and I found some place in the world Unfold Studio, and I went to this studio for learning some things about 3D printing, and it gave me really big experience and learning lots of things from there. And Dries Verburgen really helped me. He is a big man for me. And after that, I went to Teton 3D Studio in Omaha, and in this studio there was two types 3D printing on ceramics. One of that powder binding and stereolithography, and but in these technologies we are using other other material. It is not a traditional clay. So I don't want to use this technique. And when I come back to Turkey, I decided to buy some 3D printer for my thesis and for my school or university. And we bought this 3D printer for my works. And I started to make something with this and made, I graduated from the PhD degree. And after that, this machine stay with university. So I need a new one, and I bought this and transformed this machine to make something with myself. And started to make lots of things, and you can see the process, and you can see all of these my works process on the demo video on Wednesday, and a little bit process you can see. And I have I made with 3D printer 3 series. Well, firstly, I made a Selçuk series. You can see the on the image and from Selçuk series, and you know Selçuk stars is a traditional motif on our culture, for our culture. So I try to make bring together with this traditional motif and digital new technologies with 3D printer on clay, and I transform or modeling on the 3-dimensional program this form firstly, and after that I try to make some touches on the surface, because I try to make a more organic form, because you know the machine is making artificial forms, and so I try to transform from artificial to organic forms. So I made some touches on the surface and some shader, and after that I use some color and like a blue. And for blue, I use cobalt oxide, and you can see on the surface some shatter. And after that, I try to make a more organic. You know, you can see the body is full artificial, but and down. You can see the organic surface or organic texture. Another series, Power of Nature series. You can see on the screen. This technique is really difficult because you have to stay with 3D printer a long time because you know this form will approximately 15 hours making for making, and you have to stay with 3D printer because the pressure percentage is important, and the pressure air pressure is important. So you have to stay with 3D printer, but I couldn't stay with 3D printer. So when this pressure is down and make a mistake like this, and after when I saw this mistake, and I decided to make a control this mistake, and after that I try to make controlled mistake on the surface, and you can see the Power of Nature series. And after that, Middle East series, my last series, and making, and I continue to make something about this series. And you know, I try to make again some organics forms, because I'm making with 3D printer, but after touching on the surface, and I come across some memories with Middle East, because you know we had memories in the Middle East people. We are watching on TV every day about the war in the Middle East. So I remember when I saw this structure, Middle East war. So I give a name, this name for this work or for this series, and yeah, Be Child in the Middle East. This work is I really like because you know children is the most important things for us, because they will be our future, and so we have to protect them. And but there is they are living war in the war, so it was really upset for us. And I will try to I try to make some make for them, and you can see the process of this work. And I made lots of cube, and after that I tried to make some touches on the surface, and you can see the items from the childhood, and yeah, finished these works. And the last one, Breakfast in the Middle East, another version of Breakfast in the Middle East, because you can see the first version, this one, another version is all things in together. And the process of this works, and I'm making all of items, and after that stick on the surface. After that I am making some shutters on the surface. Thank you.
Thank you, Emre. Nice to get to see that work in the studio like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, on behalf of the ceramic program, I'm very pleased to welcome Matt Carras. Matt is a ceramic artist from Montreal, where he is also an assistant professor of ceramics at Concordia University. Matt holds an MFA from the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred and a BFA from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Halifax. In 2016, Matt was awarded the Artworks Grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. The funding helped organize a collaborative studio residency at MICA in Baltimore, celebrating and researching the intersection of 19th century American architectural terracotta with contemporary digital tools and techniques. In 2015, he was awarded a 1-month studio intensive residency at the Gulliago in Skalskjør, Denmark, where his research centered around the junction of traditional firing methods with digital fabrication. Matt's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally. Hello, Matt, and thank you for joining us and also for hosting this event.
Thank you, Amélie. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. The way that I figured I would start this presentation was by showing you a few ceramic objects that I didn't make. They're historical ceramic objects, but in them they frame and they encapsulate part of what I think is really interesting about ceramic objects and pottery objects. And this is the first. These are a set of 2 dishes. These are at the British Museum. It's a curatorial decision to put them together. On the left is this Chinese whiteware dish from the 9th century. And on the right is a fritware dish made in Iran from the 12th century. So the thing I think is interesting is that the story that these 2 objects tell. Clearly one is imitating the other. But one looks sort of newer than the other, and all of that is it's sort of jumbled up. Like the one that's older looks newer. It's telling the story of the advanced kind of technology of Chinese kilns. They also had found porcelain, and the Iranian potters did not have access to that material, and so they were making this engineered material, a fritware, that's trying to imitate it, but it's softer and it's not as durable. And so it's kind of eroded over time. And this is one of the things that I appreciate about pottery objects and ceramic objects. My teacher, Walter Ostrom, used to say pots were containers for cultural information. And the way these 2 objects are able to carry that cultural information about trade, about style, about exchange, about material, I think all of that is woven into these objects in there. And so that's one of the things I really appreciate. And about pots, about ceramics, this is another example. These are 2 rope-thrown pots from Biot in France, where they've got this kind of fantastically weird way of making pots. And you can see on the inside, there's this rope pattern. And the way these are made is that there's a series of profiles that are made of wood. Those profiles are on the inside here. And then there's a big rod that fits in the middle there. It's holding those profiles in place. And then a rope is bound around those profiles. And then the pot is thrown around it. You see there's this other template on the outside here to kind of guide the building and the throwing of the form. But as the clay stiffens up and gets hard enough to hold its shape, the rod in the middle is taken out, and then the profiles are taken out, and then the rope is taken away. And so that's how you're left with that imprint of the rope on the inside. And I really love these situations in ceramics where the process is really recorded in the object itself. I mean, someone could go in there and want to erase all of those marks and try to make it clean, but they remain part basically of this sort of ornament in there. And so in a lot of the work that you'll see in the XYZ show, I've sort of fallen in love with the marks that the tool makes. And I've tried to figure out situations where I can, well, reveal them, but also play around with technology. So in this case, I've surfaced all of these dishes that you'll see on the wall with terra sigillata. And terra sigillata, I think of in of itself is a kind of a form of technology at a certain time when potters were trying to figure out how to make the surface of the clay impervious to water. And so this was a sort of solution to that. It's a really old technology, but it is one nonetheless, the way I see it. And then in a more kind of practical way or visual way, it just really reveals the marks of the tool because those terracid particles are so thin and they stack up right up to the surface of the clay. And so this is one of those groupings of dishes that you'll see on the wall. The other thing that I appreciate about working digitally is how available the stuff is to us. I guess I think of myself a little bit of like a flaneur in the city, but even in the digital realm, I kind of think of myself as a flaneur online. And I like being able to I can go to the V&A or the Met Museum and have access to all of their collection and use those as sort of source material. A lot of those images are public domain, and it's sort of possible to find very specific kinds of pots and the stories behind them in these collections. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is looking at those collections, looking at the stories, at the forms behind pots, and then I'll bring those into a CAD program. And I'll talk about this more in the demonstration, but a lot of the processes that I'm using in there are really rudimentary. Like I'll be tracing an image and following the profile and using those photographs as a way to build a model. The other thing that I like about working digitally is that it's possible to do things that you would do conventionally in the studio, like stretch the clay, bend the clay, but those are really pushed to an extreme. The material is completely forgiving when it is not really a material thing. So I can stretch pots way beyond what would be possible with the actual clay. So there's this kind of relationship to the plasticity of the material, but then there's also this relationship to movement that I think is exciting there, because pots are active things. They're things that get handed, that get moved around very much, that you hand a pot to someone across the dinner table. And there's something about warping these out of shape that kind of gives them this sense of movement. And the very last thing I'd say is that this is sort of a mode of distortion too. And I love distortion. I love the way that when you open up the kiln, you might find something that you didn't expect to find because the fire has distorted the form or warped it out of shape, or maybe the glaze is not what you expected it to be. So that element of surprise is another one that I really appreciate from working in the digital realm. So once I've built those models and once I've had a chance to play around with them formally, then those models get sent to a CNC milling machine. So this is similar to what Del showed earlier. It's a cutting machine. It's basically a router that's hooked up to a gantry. It can move side to side, forward and back, up and down. And the router will cut away at the material that is placed underneath it. And so that's what you see here is the very first pass of the router as it's cutting through this high density foam. The router will usually cut in multiple steps. First, a really rough pass that takes away a lot of material, and then a finer pass that has the refined surface on it there. All of those are milled out, and then I'll pour plaster into them to get working molds. And from there on out, the process is really traditional. And I'm interested in kind of making it traditional, sometimes really looking into maybe the most traditional kind of processes I can fold into the mix, like using terra sigillata, or in this case, using a wood kiln, which I also think of as a form of technology. It's an old technology, but it's basically one that is not using either gas or electricity as the fuel to generate heat. It's using wood. And for those of you who don't know wood firings, what ends up happening there is as the wood burns, the ashes fall on the pieces in the kiln, and at certain temperatures, the ash itself melts and the ash itself forms a surface on the clay. And so some of the platters that you see in the show have that surface to them, and some of them have been really stretched to an extreme. Here's a close-up of one of these platters, and you see this kind of big hunk of clay that's fallen from a piece above. And you've also got the example over here of some of these router marks from the process of milling that are translated onto the surface. So in the show, there's this big grouping of plates on the wall, and the plates are also kind of coming from this family story. My grandmother's sister worked in a porcelain factory in Germany, in Tirschenreuth, and every year she'd send flawed plates back home, and you couldn't always tell what was wrong with them, but there was a little something wrong with them. And my grandmother had this whole collection of these plates on the wall, and I guess there's something interesting I find about revealing and showing all of the defects or all of the things that maybe usually you wouldn't show. And I think we all sort of do that, try to hide the things where maybe don't seem perfect. So there's something about that revealing of all the parts that I think is interesting. In the far end are this smaller grouping of cup forms that I've got that are made in a similar way by looking at historical forms and drawing them on the CAD program, making forms that are based off of some of these historical forms, but then warping them out of shape in a similar way to kind of find new forms, to give them a sense of movement. These were, however, they're printed in plastic and then cast in plaster. So I'll cast them using a really traditional technique and make a slip casting mold out of it, and then cast them in porcelain. The surface of these is fake wood ash glaze. So it's a glaze that's meant to imitate the kind of surface that would come out of a wood firing kiln. And then I've also kind of got this grouping of marks on them that for me is coming out of one of my favorite patterns. It's called vermiculation. And vermiculation is a kind of it's a mode of rustication of stone that is intended typically to give a building its visual weight. So often the foundation stones of a building will have vermiculation on it, or the cornerstones, the coins of a building will have vermiculation. And it's meant to kind of give the building a sense of weight, or that it looks robust. And I guess there's something about making things handmade that I've always thought of as being almost kind of like a rustication of daily life. It brings a kind of a visual weight to our daily lives. And so those are some of the ideas that are driving some of the work in there. And thank you very much. Well, this concludes our XYZ opening introductions event. There is one artist that wasn't able to join us today. Jeanne Quinn had technical difficulties, and so at the very last moment, she wasn't able to present. But Jeanne is going to be giving us a demonstration on Monday, October 4th. So that's this coming Monday. And then join us on October 6th at 2 p.m. for Emre Can's demo. On October 7th at 5 p.m., Amélie Proulx is going to be giving us a guided tour of the show. On October 12th at 11 a.m., Del Harrow will be demonstrating. On October 14th at 6 p.m., I'm going to be demonstrating. And on October 18th at 2 p.m., Eliza will be demonstrating. And then finally on October 22nd at 2 p.m. will be our panel discussion. And I think all of the demos and the panel discussion will be the best time to drop in and pose questions about the process or conceptual issues. But until then, have fun in the studio, keep those hands dirty with some clay, and I'll see you on Monday. Thank you all.